most of my life, I was known as a man of a respected religious leader, a spiritual guide to many. I was an imam, and my existence revolved entirely around religion, the teachings of the Quran, and caring for my community. From a young age, everything within me breathed devotion. My father taught me the sacred verses before I even learned to write my own name. I grew up inside the mosque, hearing the prayers echo as if they were part of my blood. It wasn't just a choice, it was my identity. I became an imam at a young age, not out of vanity, but because I felt it was what I was born to be. My elders called me an example. Young people came to me for guidance, and honestly, I thought I had all the answers. My life was marked by discipline, fasting, studying, counseling, sermons, all following a firm routine. I believed deep down that I knew God. But today, looking back, I realized there was a huge difference between talking about God and truly knowing who He is. It wasn't until old age began to weigh on me that this emptiness, which I'd always ignored, began to really bother me. At first, it was just fatigue. Then came the pain, the test, and finally, that harsh diagnosis, which seemed to knock the ground out from under me. I began to live between consultations and whispered prayers in the dark. I didn't rebel. I told myself it was just another trial, a divine, but deep down, something inside me began to crack ever so slowly. A small, nagging, almost invisible doubt, but one that grew with each passing day. You know that question we pretend doesn't exist, but it insists on echoing deep down. Mine was, what if I had spent my entire life serving the wrong idea of God? I never had the courage to tell anyone this, could I? I was the spiritual leader. The model of stout grew silently within me until the day everything turned upside down. And I say became because there's no other word that fits. What happened to me in that hospital wasn't a dream nor a delusion. It was real, more real than any sermon I've ever preached in my life. I remember the cold white light in the room. It was late at night. Everything around me was quiet, only the sound of the machines filling the silence. My breathing was already shallow. I felt my body slowly shutting down, as if life was slipping away silently. My eyelids grew heavy, and then came an unusual silence. It wasn't the silence of an empty place. It was as if the whole world had stopped, and suddenly I was no longer there. No bed, no roof, no nurses. But I was still conscious. I knew I wasn't sleeping. And the strangest thing, I felt none, nothing. I knew I was dead. And to my surprise, it didn't scare me. That's when it all began. The The first thing I felt was a gentle force pulling me upward. There was no ground, no sky, but I was being carried. It was a feeling of weightlessness, something grand, as if something much larger than me were completely enveloping me. I tried to understand what was happening, but I no longer had a mouth nor a body, only thoughts, consciousness, a consciousness clearer than anything I had ever experienced when I realized someone was there, a presence. I couldn't see a face nor a form, but I knew with absolute certainty someone was standing before me, and that someone knew everything about me. Can't explain it, but in a second I felt like that presence knew every thought I'd ever had, every hidden intention, every word I'd spoken just to sound wise, every sermon I'd preached with pride in my heart. At that moment, it was as if my soul had been completely exposed. But the most shocking thing was there was no condemnation. None. Only the truth. A truth so clear, so pure, it cut like a blade. This presence pierced me with an eyeless gaze. It was as if every memory of my life took on sound, shape, and weight there, in that place. Unlike what I'd always imagined, it wasn't a courtroom. No one accused me of anything. Even so, I knew there was no hiding anything, no gesture, no unresolved thought. Everything was coming to the surface, and the hardest thing to face was realizing that my faith had always been based on fear. Fear of hell, fear of making mistakes, fear of not being good enough. Yes, I fasted. Yes, I counseled. Yes, I studied. But inside, I was terrified, and this fear hid behind my religious robes, behind the beautiful words I repeated without thinking. At that moment, I understood that I had been mistaken for many, many years. And then something happened. Something I'll never forget. In the middle of that place, in that dimension I can't even name, another presence appeared, different from the first. This one wasn't invisible, came as light, but it was no ordinary light. It was alive. It approached slowly, and when it stood before me, with a clarity that still gives me chills, it was a man, but not just any man. It was as if the light itself bowed before him, and before I even heard any name, I knew it was Jesus, not the Jesus I learned to reject. He wasn't a theological idea. He wasn't a figure distant from religious discussions. He was real. He was there. And when he looked inside me, everything fell apart. That look, I can't even explain it. It was love and authority all at once. I couldn't hold his gaze, not because it was aggressive, but because I felt so small, so exposed, as if every part of my soul had been turned inside out. Everything I thought I knew about God simply crumbled before that presence. Jesus said nothing at first. He just looked at me. But that look spoke louder than 1,000 words. I felt like he knew every second of my life, from my first steps as a child to the nights I cried alone, not understanding why. Even though I prayed so much, I still felt empty inside. And most devastating, he didn't look at me with anger or with contempt. There was a gentle sadness in his gaze, a compassion so deep it destroyed me inside. In that moment, I understood that I was face to face with the truth, not with a concept, not with a doctrine, but with someone. The truth was a person, and she was standing before me. My mind tried to resist. Everything I'd learned throughout my life screamed, this is it's just a deception. But my spirit knew, with a certainty no logic could erase, this was real. This was Jesus. He was everything I'd spent my entire life trying to hide. Somehow, my heart recognized who he was. Then he began to approach slowly, unhurriedly, weightlessly, and at the same time, that lightness hurt because it left me completely vulnerable. With each step he took, forgotten memories surfaced, sermons I'd delivered with vanity, prayers I'd recited just to impress, advice I'd given without true love. I relived it all, and he didn't even need to say a word. His presence spoke louder than any rebuke, and I cried, not with my eyes, with my soul. I don't know how long I stood there, unable to move. Time seemed to stand still, or maybe everything was happening at once. What I felt was a mixture of pain and relief, as if something inside me was finally being ripped out, as if my pride was being crushed, not out of humiliation, but out of liberation. It was as if I were standing in front of a mirror that revealed what had always been hidden, my true intentions, my secret desire to be admired, the efforts I made not for love, but to maintain the image of a pure man. To others, I was the leader, the wise man, the role model. But inside, I just wanted to know if God really saw me. And there, before Jesus, I understood. He always saw me, even when I thought he was far away. Even in the early morning hours when I prayed alone, not knowing if anyone was listening, he was there. And it was at that moment that Jesus spoke, but not with human words. I didn't hear with my ears. It was as if his voice strayed inside me, and what he said was so simple, yet so profound. You were sincere, but you were lost. Those words tore me apart inside, because I knew they were true, and it hurt to realize that I could have lived my whole life thinking I was right and still be far from God, not out of malice, but out of blindness. Religion shaped me, it formed me, but it also blinded me. I obeyed. I dedicated myself, but I never truly knew God. I knew rules, structures, but I didn't know the grace. I didn't know love. I didn't know the cross. And when he said that, I could only respond, and then he surprised me. Jesus didn't answer me the way I imagined. He didn't give me a to-do list. He didn't tell me to go back and fix everything I'd done wrong. He just looked at me. But in that look, there was a peace I'd never felt before. A peace that didn't depend on who I was or what I had done. It was as if his eyes said, "Now you understand." And yes, it was true, but it wasn't a vision with the eyes of the body. It was something much deeper. I saw with my spirit. That's when I understood why so many Christians speak of Jesus' love with tears. I understood why that cross, which I had always avoided facing, was so necessary. I saw him on the cross, but not as a religious image or a stained glass figure. I witnessed the moment he chose to stand there for me. This completely disarmed me. He could have come down. He could have avoided it all, but he stayed. And he stayed out of love for me. Every drop of blood that flowed from that cross carried away my sins, my fears, my arrogance, my empty religiosity. And there, in that moment, I finally understood what grace was. Grace is not a pretty concept. Grace is someone taking my place. At that moment, I didn't need arguments. There were no more justifications, because there, on that cross, everything had already been done. Everything had already been paid for. When I looked at him again, I didn't see a judge. I saw a Savior, a God who bled to rescue me, and I cried again. But this time, it was out of relief, because in that moment, I knew I had been forgiven, even without deserving it, even without having done anything to earn this. I wanted to speak, but the words failed me. There was no way to explain what I felt. It was too overwhelming. It was as if my entire past had been swallowed up by that moment. And at the same time, as if everything took on new meaning, not because my story had been erased, but because it had been redeemed. And then everything started to make sense. Even the days I felt alone, even the moments I silently questioned God, too ashamed to admit it. Jesus knew everything. He saw every second, every prayer said out of obligation without true faith. Every time I hid behind religion, afraid to face my own failures, and yet he loved me. But he didn't just love me, he called me. At that moment, he showed me faces, many faces. I saw the young men who came to me for advice, the women who sought comfort, the men who listened to my sermons and wept. I saw each one, and something cut me inside like a blade. I gave them religion, but I didn't give them Jesus. I taught rules, I talked about God, but I myself did not know him. That squeezed my heart as never before. Those people trusted me. Some were left without answers. Others became trapped in rules. And there, in that moment, I thought only one thing. I must return, show them what I saw. I must tell them that Jesus is not merely a name in religious debates. He is real. He lives. He is everything. Jesus did not need to send me a command to return. I knew he wanted that. It was not an order. It was a call, an invitation. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly ready to obey. Not out of fear, not to maintain a reputation, but out of love. A love so great it seemed to rebuild me from within. I looked at him and knew my life could no longer go on as before. I didn't even know how or where, or if I could explain all of it, but I knew that if I returned, I would have to tell what I had seen. Shout it if necessary, because too many people are getting lost inside religion as I got lost. Sincere people, devout people, but who have not yet seen Jesus truly. And I needed to be the bridge. I had to be the voice. I could not keep this to myself. That was when everything began to dissolve. His presence started to recede, but unhurried. I felt as if they were pulling me back. The place where I had been grew more distant, and little by little, I began to hear sounds, voices, it was as if they were showing me back into the world. My eyes opened slowly. I saw the light sleeping on this land, the frantic nurses around me. One of them was crying, another was saying, "He's back, he's back," but I couldn't see it. I only wept. I lay there, tears filling my eyes, my heart feeling as though it had been torn out and turned different. I had come back, but nothing in me was the same. The following days, the doctors treated me like a miracle. They said they couldn't explain how my heart had stopped for so long, and yet I returned with no after effects. But what they did not know, and what I could not immediately share, was that most of me remained trapped in what I had seen. My body was there, but my soul was still trying to comprehend it all. I stared at the ceiling, at my hands, at my breathing, and felt a mixture of gratitude and urgency. Gratitude for having been reached, urgency to do something with this. I knew that what had been shown to me was not just for me. It was for all those who, like me, were. And what hurt me most was realizing that I myself never really knew him. It tugged at my heart in a way I'd never felt before. Those people trusted me. Some left without answers. Others were trapped by rules and obligations. And there, in a sacred moment, only one thought took hold of me. I need to go back. I need to show them what I saw. I need to tell them that Jesus is real. He's not just a name lost in religious debates. He's alive. He is everything. Jesus didn't need to give me an order. I felt he wanted this, but not as an obligation. It was a call, an invitation. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly willing to obey, not out of fear, not to protect an image, but out of love, a love so strong that it seemed to rebuild every broken part inside me. I looked into his eyes and understood my life could no longer continue the same way. I didn't even know how to explain what I've experienced or where to begin, but I knew if I went back, I'd have to tell, scream if necessary, because there are a lot of people getting lost within religion, just like I got lost. Sincere people, dedicated people, but they haven't yet truly seen Jesus. And I needed to be that bridge, to be that voice. I couldn't keep it to myself. It was then that everything began to dissolve. His presence began to recede, ever so slowly, and I felt as if something were pulling me back. That place grew distant, and slowly the sounds of the earth returned. Noises, voices, the sound of machines, the white light of the hospital. It was like they were sewing me back into this world. My eyes opened slowly. I saw the white ceiling, the oxygen mask, the nurses' faces. One of them was crying. Another said, "He's back, he's back." But I couldn't say anything. I just cried. Tears streamed down my face as my chest felt like it had been ripped out and put back in. I was back, but nothing about me was the same. In the following days, the doctor said I was a miracle, that they couldn't understand how my heart had stopped working for so long, and yet I had come back without any after effects. But what they didn't know, and what I couldn't put into words at the time, was that a large part of me was still trying to make of what I had experienced. My body was there, but my soul was still trapped in that place. I looked at the ceiling, at my hands, felt my breath, and it was a mixture of gratitude and urgency. Gratitude for having finished, and urgency to do something. I knew that what I was shown was not just for me, it was for all those who, like me, structures, repeating memorized phrases, following doctrines, trying to reach God with effort without knowing that he was already there all along, alive, present, waiting. It took me several days to work up the courage to tell anyone. When I finally spoke to my closest friend, he listened silently, but his face said what words couldn't. Confusion. Maybe even he was my brother in faith for many years, someone I admired. When I finished telling him, he took a deep breath and asked, "Are you sure this wasn't just a dream?" And I looked into his eyes with a calm I didn't even know I had, and I answered something that came out effortlessly. "I've been so sure of anything in my life, and it's because it wasn't imagination. It wasn't the delirium of a dying old man. It was real. I've been there. I saw. I felt. And since then, everything I do, everything I say, revolves around this truth. Jesus is real. He saved me, and he showed me that all sincerity without truth is still the wrong path. From then on, things weren't easy. Far from it. There are so many people trapped in rituals, repetitions, rules, thinking they need to try harder and harder to reach God without realizing that he is already there, alive, present, waiting with love. It took me several days to work up the courage to tell anyone what I experienced. And when I finally spoke to my closest friend, someone who had walked with me for many years in faith, he listened in silence, but his face said it all: astonishment, confusion, maybe even fear. He always admired me, always trusted me. When I finished telling him everything, he took a deep breath and asked, "Are you sure this wasn't a dream?" And I didn't even have to think. I looked him straight in the eye and said something that came from the depths of my soul. I've never been so sure of anything in my entire life. It's true, it wasn't a daydream. It wasn't the imagination of a dying old man. It was real as me being here now. I've been there. I saw. I felt. And since then, everything in my life has revolved around this. Jesus is real. He found me, and it showed me that all sincerity without truth is still the wrong path. But from then on, nothing was easy. Nothing at all. I knew my life was going to change, but I didn't imagine how much. Talking about Jesus, coming from who I was like throwing dry fire into a field of straw. Many people turned their backs. Some called me a traitor. Others said I had lost my mind. Those who once revered me now avoided even meeting my gaze. It hurt, and how it hurt, but I couldn't go back. There was no longer any way to pretend nothing had happened, because it wasn't a change of heart. It was an encounter, a revelation, calling. In the early days, I faced everything in silence. I just observed. But over time, some people began to seek me out in secret, driven by curiosity, by a nagging feeling in their chest, wanting to understand. And each time I shared my experience, it was as if everything inside me was renewed. I felt the same butterflies in my stomach, the same peace, the same certainty. I started studying everything again, as if it were the first time. Only now my eyes were open. I read the Gospels with hunger. Every word of Jesus made sense, as if everything I'd been searching for before was there, in his simplicity, in the way he looked at people, how he spoke firmly, but always with love. And then I realized what I had always why it all felt so real. That's what made it all so real. There was one day in particular that stuck with me. It had been a while since everything I'd experienced. I was walking alone in the old square where years ago I used to sit and read the Quran. It was early in the morning. The sun was just beginning to rise behind the buildings, and the air was still cool. From afar, I saw a woman sitting on a bench, praying softly with a rosary in her hands. I sat on the other side of the square and just watched, and for some reason, that scene touched me deeply. At that moment, everything made even more sense. It wasn't about right or wrong. It wasn't about religion or tradition. It was about seeking the truth. That woman, with her simple silence, reminded me that God sits in the details, in what we often overlook. I closed my eyes for a few seconds and thought, how many times did Jesus try to reach me before all this? How many signs did I miss thinking they were just coincidences? That very day, I made a decision. I decided to tell everything publicly. No filter, no rehearsal. I recorded a simple video looking directly into the camera without a script, and I spoke. I spoke about the hospital, about that presence, about the cross, and I said with all sincerity, I have seen Jesus, and he is the Son of God. I posted the video trembling, cold sweat. I expected criticism, ridicule, rejection, and they came. They came hard. But along with them came messages I'll never forget. People saying, I felt what you felt. I always felt like something was missing. I cried with your video. That's when I understood. That encounter with Jesus wasn't just for me. It was for many people. And even if it cost me everything, my reputation, my friendships, my safety, I could no longer remain silent. Because once you see the truth, you can't live like before. One of the hardest parts was facing people from my old community again. At first, I avoided certain places, afraid of confrontation. But one day, I went to visit a sick friend and ended up running into several familiar faces. The atmosphere grew tense. Some looked at me with others lowered their eyes. But there was one young man, a young man I had counseled years ago, who came running and hugged me tightly, as if he were holding something he had long awaited. Tears in his eyes, he said, remember when I came to you with doubts? You told me to study more, pray more, fast more, but really, all I wanted to know was God loved me. That got through to me. I didn't know what to say. I could only respond with the simplest truth I've ever known. Today I know he loves, and he loves me so much that he came to get me. The boy cried, and so did I. Since then, I've dedicated myself to listening more and talking less, because I realized that for many years I was ready to give answers, but I rarely truly listen to people's hearts. Today, when someone comes to me, hand them a memorized verse or a list of rules, I tell what I experienced. I speak of I speak of Jesus, someone I knew, not as a religious figure, but as a real person. Sometimes people ask me, have you left Islam? And I always answer with a calm heart, I haven't given up searching for God. I've just found the missing answer, and this answer has a name. That look, that look that pierced me completely and at the same time rebuilt me is something impossible to forget. To this day, there are nights when I wake up in the middle of the night and everything comes back to me as if it had happened yesterday. And I ask myself, why me? Why did he come to me of all people? I, who denied it so many times without realizing it. I, who said that he was not God. And the only answer I find is grace. It was grace. A love that I will never be able to understand with my mind, but that found me anyway. No matter how much I try to explain, there are things that simply can't be explained. They can only be felt. Over time, I also realized that this story might never be accepted by everyone, and that's okay. I'm not telling this story seeking applause or approval. I tell you because it's real, because it happened, and because I know that at this very moment there are people living with the same emptiness that I carried for so many years. People who do everything right, but still feel distant from God. People who follow all the rules but find no peace. People who love faith, but have never experienced the Father's embrace. And if my testimony is smart and awakens in someone the question, do I really know Jesus? Then it will all have been worth it. Because it's not about religion versus religion. It's not about changing beliefs. It's about a meeting, an encounter that turned my life upside down and made me reborn inside. Sometimes people ask me if I would go back to that place, if I would relive it all over again. And honestly, I don't know. Not because it was bad. On the contrary, it was the most truthful moment of my entire existence. But it was so profound, so beyond what this world can explain. To this day, I can't describe it exactly. I just know that since that day, I have never been the same. It's like everything happened in the blink of an eye and yet lasted forever. Like the sky opened for a brief moment just to reach me, and then everything went back to normal, or rather, almost everything, because inside me, nothing was ever normal again. There was no formal farewell. Nobody told me, your time here is over. It simply ceased, as if the experience had been plucked from thin air, as if the sky had closed in again. I didn't hear anything else. I didn't see anything else. Only silence remained. But it was a different silence. matter how